Okay, this is human evolution. On the right, we have from the top, which is older, to the bottom, which is recent. We start with the chimp. That split between chimpanzee and humans, or the hominin lineage, was about 77.5 million years ago. Seems like a long time. Not really. Great apes split from the other monkeys about 15 million years ago. Okay, now if we go down the list, we go from more ancient to more recent. You can also see there are character traits that are shown on the phylogeny. So this is a phylogeny of humans. You can actually look at some of these. So right here we have hypothesized that at some point bipedalism slowly evolved. We certainly see it by the time of Australopithecus afarensis, which is the famous Lucy. The Australopithecines had very small brains, as well as what was be about the same size as chimpanzees, maybe a little bit bigger. It wasn't until Homo showed up down here about 2 million years ago that brain size finally started to increase. And it further increased with Homo erectus, which was found mainly in Africa, and it looks like Homo erectus actually left Africa and spread around the world all the way to across Asia. And they had smaller teeth, they had longer legs, they pretty much were as tall as modern humans, and at one point, modern human, the lineage that led to modern humans went out of Africa, and it split into Neanderthals and Homo heidelbergensis. Actually, it's now called the Denisovans. And that lineage also, earlier, before going out of Africa, also was modern humans. Okay, Neanderthals and Denisovans and modern humans, they all had very, very large brains. In fact, Neanderthal actually slightly larger. Neanderthal showed up about, 400,000 years ago, and the Denisovans around then too. Modern humans evolved about 300,000 years ago in Africa, and then eventually there were a number of emigrations out of Africa, only one of which finally resulted in the modern humans that we see today. So, if we can see which came first, evolution of bipedalism or increased brain size. Well, bipedalism happened around here, probably 6 million years ago, whereas large brain size happened down here. Much more recent, probably the last couple million years. So large brains were not actually favored until then. There were many different hominin species, in other words, those resulting that were part of the human lineage, including Australopithecus, Homo, and others that lived actually at the same time. So there were probably Australopithecus and early Homo living together. There were various other species of Homo that overlapped, especially modern humans, Neanderthals, Denisovans, those kinds of things. Okay. Now, if this phylogeny were actually true, we'll say it's a hypothesis phylogeny. Okay. What predictions would you make in terms of the genetic similarity from older to more recent ancestors? Okay, so we go down this way. Older, recent. Okay. Would you expect genetic similarity to be more similar between species and modern humans, or less similar? Or would you expect more similarity between older species like chimpanzees and modern humans? So remember that as time goes on, mutations occur and they accumulate. And they accumulate as things evolve. So organisms, let's say in this case humans, like Neanderthals, which preceded Homo sapiens, modern humans, but they're very, very close. And so they have the most genetic similarity between modern humans and any other hominin. In fact, they were actually able to interbreed with modern humans to a certain extent. Okay. It turns out, why do humans have 23 pairs of homologous chromosomes, but great apes have 24? Okay, so remember we have a pair of homologous chromosomes, one from mom, one from pop, and there are 23 of those pairs. So 23 chromosomes from mom and 23 identical chromosomes, well, almost identical. The same genes are in the same places on those chromosomes, but there might be different alleles. And then, however, the great apes actually have 24. Okay. So if we were going to look at this phylogeny here, okay, we would say that on the lineage leading to modern humans, humans suddenly had, that lineage suddenly appeared to have lost a chromosome. Now, there are two possible hypotheses for this. There's a human lineage lost a chromosome, or two ape chromosomes actually fused into one human chromosome. Now, just so you know, a chromosome has thousands of genes on it. If you were to actually lose thousands of genes from a mutation, in other words, a whole chromosome disappears, you would end up with an unviable embryo. It would die immediately. Okay, so that doesn't wash. Okay. So the other possible explanation is that two ape chromosomes actually fused. That's another hypothesis. So apes had 24 chromosomes, all of them, including orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos, and all the others that have gone extinct. And yet humans have 23. So if the chromosomes fused, the prediction was one human chromosome should have homologous genes from 2 ape chromosomes. It turns out that human chromosome 2 is homologous with ape chromosomes 12 and 13. In other words, it looks like 12 and 13 fused together into a very long human chromosome 2. Also, we don't know this yet, we haven't looked at it, but in terms of chromosome structure, in the center is a centromere, and then on either ends of a chromosome are telomeres. And there are what are called vestigial, and that means leftover traits that are no longer functional. So there's a vestigial centromere and also 2 vestigial telomeres on human chromosome 2. Human skin color. Obviously, there's all colors of humans in terms of very light skin, various other skin colors, very dark skin. It turns out, we haven't learned about this, but we're going to very shortly. Convergent evolution is where traits are similar not because of a common ancestor, in other words, inheriting it from a common ancestor, but because of similar selective environments. So it turns out that UV light, that's ultraviolet light, is required for vitamin D synthesis. However, there are some problems or some environments where you don't get a lot of light, namely in temperate and higher latitude or environments. So like northern United States, Canada, Europe, Asia, northern Asia, all that, and then perhaps South, very far South America, that sort of thing. Okay. In those cases, there's not enough UV light for vitamin D synthesis. At the same time, in the tropics, you get lots of UV light. And UV light, though, is a carcinogen and can cause skin cancers like melanoma. Plus, UV light inhibits another vitamin called folate production. And so, too much UV light, you have too much, not enough folate production. So, under UV light conditions, low light conditions, right here, right? Light skin, there's adequate vitamin D, adequate folate, and high fitness. However, under low UV light, dark skin, low vitamin D, not enough. Adequate folate, yes. Low fitness. Now, under high UV light, light skin, adequate vitamin D, low folate, low fitness, dark skin, adequate vitamin D, adequate folate, high fitness. Okay, so it turns out you invariably see lighter skin under low UV light conditions, like we have in temperate United States and Europe and Central and Northern Asia. But in the tropics, we usually find dark skin. And it evolved independently in many of those regions. So evolution of skin color has occurred many times. That means convergent evolution. Okay. Skin color is an example of a trait that has undergone natural selection. Depending on the light levels, it favors lighter skin or darker skin. In each case, the amount of melanin, which is what causes skin color, represents a compromise between the need to protect folate and the need for vitamin D. And you can actually see high UV light environments, in Africa, India, Australia, and then South America and Mexico. Okay? So there's a question. As I mentioned, about 2 million years ago, human beings started various lineages or various species of humans started evolving a larger brain size. Now, there's some questions about why it happened. Why didn't it happen earlier? Several lines of evidence support the hypothesis that natural selection for the ability to reason and communicate triggered by increased tool and language use and resulted in large brains. In other words, that natural selection favored the ability to reason and communicate, and that was triggered by an increase in tool and language use. In other words, as the human lineage started using more and more complex tools and language, they needed more and more higher brain size. Obviously, just because you need it doesn't mean you get it, but mutations added up that increased brain size. So humans resulted in large brains. Okay. So, on the bottom here, we have brain size, and then along the side here, we have age. Okay, so let's see. Chimpanzee, up here has a brain size of about 400. Australopithecus, like Lucy, about 500, very small. It wasn't until we get to Homo that we actually see, right here, an increase in brain size, and also another Homo here. So both of these are around 700 or 800. Homo ergaster, bigger, 900. Homo erectus, about 1,000 cc's. Homo heidelbergensis, about 1,200. Homo neanderthalensis, about 1,500. And Homo sapiens, us, actually, about 1380. Okay? So, now the thing is, remember when we talked about correlations? So over time we see an increasing brain size, and we wonder what caused this increased brain size at a certain point. Come on. There you go. Right around here. Okay? Now, you could also turn it around in terms of cause and effect, why not increase tool use and language or cause by the selection for the ability to reason, instead of the ability to reason and communicate might have caused increased tool and language use. So that's the trouble with making inferences. You'd have to actually figure out some predictions that might separate those two from in terms of cause and effect. Why did intelligence evolve? Some more hypotheses. There are first of all, there's the cognitive map hypothesis. Widely distributed food sources require spatial memory, and this is often found in like corvids, like jays and crows and ravens and nutcrackers. They have incredible spatial memory. In fact, they have a much better spatial memory than we do. And they have corresponding larger regions of the brain that are dedicated to spatial memory. Now, we also require spatial memory. So that's one hypothesis. Another is perhaps sexual selection. Perhaps intelligence is sexy. So here's Einstein, except he's got some bod, right? Perhaps that makes him more attractive to women. In fact, it turns out that he tended to sleep around quite a bit once he became famous. And then finally, there's this other idea called the social brain or Machiavellian intelligence hypothesis. In other words, perhaps, hold on a second. Okay, these are Galapagos monkeys. They're related to baboons. They live in a highly social environment. There's a hierarchy in terms of who's on top in terms of males. Also within females, the same sort of thing. So they have to. The monkeys have to know where they are in the hierarchy, so that they don't get in trouble with a higher-ranked male or a higher-ranked female. And in fact, I would say probably in terms of humans, we also are very social. Our ability to navigate human social interactions is probably one of the strongest selective forces. Selective force, selecting for a larger brain to help in dealing with other human beings and how that might affect your fitness, whether it's sexual selection, whether it's power dynamics, all that sort of thing. So that's called the social brain or Machiavellian intelligence hypothesis. Machiavelli was this famous kind of diplomat in Europe, and came up with this idea about how to run foreign policy for various countries. And basically, he suggested that you don't worry about being good or bad. You just want to advance your interests from a completely selfish perspective. Okay? So it's adaptive response to a complexity of the social environment. It could very well be that all these hypotheses are actually true. They're not mutually exclusive necessarily. Okay. in the last 10 years, well, DNA and molecular biology and understanding how traits are, or DNA is passed from generation to generation. We've learned a lot. We learned how it's regulated. In other words, how genes are expressed. I'll talk a little bit about this. But DNA tends to degrade at a very rapid rate. So it's always been thought, or was, that after, a few tens of years or hundreds of years, the DNA gets so degraded that you cannot recover it. But it turns out that's not necessarily true. So this guy by the name of Svante Pavo, who's Swiss, but he lives in Germany, he, as a young grad student working in molecular biology on something entirely different, he wondered if he could actually try to recover DNA from mummies, Egyptian mummies. And he actually did. And he showed, now it turns out there was a lot of contamination with modern DNA because the people had handled the bones and all that. But he actually showed there were differences in DNA in terms of alleles that are no longer found today, but only in Egyptian mummies. So he's the father of paleogenetics. That means recovering ancient DNA. Okay, so now, if we look at this map here, this phylogeny, have a common ancestor. On the one side, you have down to gorillas, bonobos, chimpanzees. They have 48 chromosomes. On the other, humans and the human lineage, including Neanderthals, Denisovans, and humans. And we know this, well, humans are still around, but there's been Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA and other DNA recovered in these animals, or these species of human have been extinct for at least 30,000 years. Okay? And they've recovered some of this stuff that's even up to a couple of 100,000 years. I think the oldest DNA recovered has been in an ancient horse from about 780,000 years ago. So here's a Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon, and Cro-Magnon is essentially modern humans for the most part. This is what they look like in terms of skeletal. And then this is Neanderthal. Now remember, Neanderthals actually have bigger brains on average than modern humans. It didn't necessarily mean they were smarter, but they were certainly pretty intelligent creatures. They weren't as tall, obviously, as modern humans, but their bone structure was much, much heavier, and they weighed, so this guy was probably 5'5", right here, this Neanderthal, but he probably weighed 250 pounds. This modern human, perhaps 5'10", maybe 6 feet tall, maybe 200 pounds. You see it in the skeleton as well. Neanderthal. The rib cage is completely closed off in Neanderthal. It is open in modern humans. Okay? They also have a bigger pelvis, thicker arm bones, thicker leg bones, and a number of other things that help them survive. It seems like they were they mainly hunted big game like mammoths and that sort of thing. They suffered a lot of broken bones. It turns out their bones healed it seems, more rapidly than modern humans. We find a lot of Neanderthal skeletons with evidence of that kind of damage from trying to kill and hunt. So at the same time, modern humans and Neanderthals occurred at the same time and in the same place. Neanderthals weren't as common. In fact, they usually lived in small groups, and the overall population was smaller. When the humans showed up, there were more humans, and they coexisted around the same time. There's a question, though, why modern humans persisted and Neanderthals went extinct. So Neanderthals are gone. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Archaic Homo. Now, archaic means old species, older human species. Okay, and of course modern human species. So here we have modern humans. Okay, here we have Neanderthals. And here we have Denisovans, which are recently discovered that are more closely related to Neanderthals than they are to modern humans. Okay. Now, so this is mitochondrial DNA. This is not the DNA found in the nucleus, but we have these mitochondria that are the kind of furnaces that produce energy for us that our cells can use. We actually inherited that by perhaps being invaded by a bacteria that then became symbiotic with humans, or perhaps engulfed by a larger cell. Happened over 1 billion years ago. But mitochondria have their own DNA. Okay, so you can see that in terms of mitochondrial DNA, the difference between Neanderthal and modern humans is 202 different base pairs. In terms of modern humans, different populations, the most differences you find are not between 44 and 99 differences, substitutions. In terms of Denisovans and humans, there's even a greater difference, 385 differences in terms of mitochondrial DNA. So it looks like Homo neanderthalensis, the Neanderthals, right here, diverged from Denisovans here about 640,000 years ago. Before that, they were considered a single lineage. Humans, Neanderthals, Denisovans diverged from their own most recent common ancestor over 1 million years ago in Africa. And then humans diverged from this group 1 million years ago, went on its merry way, the lineage, rather, that led to modern humans. And modern humans didn't really show up until about 300,000 years ago. So this is a picture, by the way, of a Denisovan. Okay, so this is where, for the most part, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans were found. This is a picture of a Neanderthal, a recreation. All we have is bones. Neanderthals were found primarily in Western Europe from about 600,000 years ago all the way into Siberia. And then Denisovans, more and more material is found. They've been found, for the most part, in East Asia, and their genes have been spread all the way down through here, and perhaps there's some Denisovans that were in here as well. However, over here, an older ancestor of about 400,000 years ago looks like a Neanderthal, but it actually had Denisovan mitochondrial DNA. Anyway, so it turns out there was interbreeding between the Denisovans and Neanderthals, and there was also interbreeding between modern humans and Neanderthals, okay, and between Denisovans. Now, the Denisovans that interbred with humans, these humans were modern humans, but they were the ones that are found mainly in New Guinea and Australia, right around down here. Neanderthals are also found in Eurasians all the way across into Eurasian humans all the way across Asia. And so that's where we find it. So here we have, this indicates that at least 3 Homo species coexisted in Eurasia 40,000 years ago: Denisovans, Neanderthals, and modern humans. There's also evidence of, in Australia, of Aborigines of an earlier modern human colonization from about 270,000 years ago, but that was an earlier modern human that none of those genes actually persisted into modern humans today. Okay, so all this stuff is from ancient DNA that we found out. Before, all we had was bones and paleontology and anthropology, and bones, there's a lot of variation, and it's hard to know whether an individual, because some individuals had bones that looked like a mixture between Neanderthals and modern humans. Remember the differences in terms of bone structure, but it wasn't until we had ancient DNA that we could actually see these differences, and that there was in fact some interbreeding going on among these different species. So, here's some hypotheses that have been proposed in terms of where and how modern humans originated. One of them is called the multi-regional hypothesis. And that is spread of Homo erectus throughout the world, not necessarily from anywhere in specific, and they became Europeans, Asians, Australians, and there was lots of gene flow going on. So these things across mean that there's interbreeding going along all the way across. And we're going from Homo erectus to modern humans in terms of years ago. Homo erectus, 1,800,000, and then modern humans, obviously. Okay, now, there's also this out of Africa hypothesis that all modern humans originated in Africa, then branched off into different places throughout the world. Okay, Europeans, Asians, Australians, and then finally, but in this case, there were no, in out of Africa, there was no interbreeding between modern humans and Neanderthals or Denisovans. In other words, they pretty much came into these new areas where these archaic populations of humans were, Neanderthals and Denisovans and perhaps some others, and basically replaced them, outcompeted them, maybe killed them off. It's hard to know. And then finally, there's this leaky replacement hypothesis. And that is that modern humans evolved in Africa, and this is not just modern human lineage, but also Denisovans here. So all this is before they split up into Neanderthals and into Denisovans. And then humans split off from Neanderthals and Denisovans. And then these split off from each other around there. And the modern human lineage really first arose here in Africa and in European, Asian, Melanesian, and that with these modern humans there was actually interbreeding between Neanderthals and Melanesians and Asians and oops, sorry. Okay, not Africans, because by the time the Neanderthals were only found in Eurasia, not in Africa, and modern humans were found in Africa, but then a group left and colonized all of Asia and Europe and the South Pacific, and so they interbred with Neanderthals, and so Neanderthals, right? They interbred more with them. Now, Denisovans, it turns out, first of all, they interbred with Neanderthals, probably earlier. They also it turns out, interbred primarily with Melanesians. These are people found in Australia, Aborigines in New Guinea, and some of the rest of Oceania. Okay, so these different hypotheses in terms of the origination of modern humans make different predictions. First of all, they make predictions about time and place of where anatomically modern humans would first originate, the amount of genetic diversity, and the possibility of inbreeding. So we'll be able to distinguish these hypotheses and which are more likely compared to the other hypotheses. So that's what we're going to do. So here's a table that I just showed. Now, the multi-regional hypothesis suggests that the oldest modern human fossils should be randomly distributed across Africa, Eurasia, and Australia. To distinguish it from the out of Africa hypothesis, it states that the oldest anatomically modern humans, like us, should only be found, the oldest ones should only be found in Africa. Only younger modern humans should be found elsewhere. And then there's admixture, or the leak replacement hypothesis, and that also states that the oldest fossils of modern humans should be found in Africa. Okay. These are predictions. Location of ancestral alleles, in other words, the oldest alleles in modern humans in phylogeny, and where they should be found. Okay, so multi-regional again, there should be no consistent pattern. They should be, all these ancestral very old alleles should be found anywhere, including Eurasia, Australia, Africa. However, for out of Africa, the oldest alleles should be found in the earliest modern humans that are found in Africa. Same with admixture. Not too much difference between those two. And then the divergence time between African versus non-African populations of modern humans right here should be greater than 1 million years ago out of Africa. Less than 200,000 years ago. Actually, this is wrong now. The earliest modern human fossils that have been found in Morocco. They're only fossils. There's no DNA at this point. And they've been found actually in Morocco. And they're about almost 300,000 years ago. KYA is 300,000 years ago. Okay. And in terms of genetic diversity, the multi-regional again should be equal in all three regions: Africa, Eurasia, Australia, and Oceania. But in terms of the out of Africa, the greatest genetic diversity should be in Africa, because that's where modern humans originated. And so there's been more time for mutations to accumulate. The same thing with admixture. And then finally, in terms of gene flow, in the multi-regional model, there should be extensive gene flow between all these different modern human populations that evolved independently in those different areas. In other words, they evolved independently. Modern humans evolved independently in different places instead of all evolving in one place and then spreading out. And then out of Africa, genetic gene flow, there should be no. It should be modern humans originated in Africa, left Africa to spread around the world, and replaced any archaic humans like Neanderthals and Denisovans. So no gene flow. And then finally, the admixture or gene flow between archaic and modern humans suggests that there was gene flow between them, okay, unlike the out of Africa. So let's take a look. So the oldest anatomically modern human fossils, like us, are found in Africa. For both, so that supports the out of Africa and admixture hypothesis. Now, first of all, I want to point out, up until very recently, the oldest modern human fossils were found in East Africa about 200,000 years ago. It turns out now, though, that okay, hold on. Okay, fuck it. Oh, here we go. Oh, okay, there we go. Okay, so Morocco is up here, and it turns out recently there were some fossils that have been dated to about 300,000 years ago that show a mixture of archaic features, more of a brow ridge, let's say, like Neanderthals, and more derived modern human features. Okay, so this old hypothesis of originating in East Africa, it might have been just a matter of where people were looking, archaeologists and paleontologists. So now we don't know exactly where modern humans might have originated throughout Africa with a lot of gene flow and differentiated. Okay, so here we are. Also, there might have been colonizations of humans leaving Africa, and these would be more older modern humans, like 220,000 years ago, that made it all the way down to Australia and interbred with Denisovans. Okay, but those alleles that they brought actually are no longer found in modern humans. Okay, so there's a lot of different things going on here. The earliest modern humans found so far in Europe are about 40,000 years. In Asia, older now, probably 80,000 years, even into East Asia, of course throughout Africa, and then of course, just so you notice, the Siberian land bridge that connects, what at one time connected Asia, eastern Asia, and western North America and Alaska. That was the Bering Land Bridge. Humans actually probably didn't make it over to North America until about 20,000 years ago. There's a number of questions about whether they came down a coastal route and then spread out, and because they've been found in South America 15,000 years ago. Okay, there's a lot of questions out there, but let's look at it. In terms of the fossil evidence, the earliest fossils actually are in Africa, but they're in Morocco. Okay. The next oldest are in Ethiopia, 200,000 years ago. Throughout Africa, there's also, looks like there's old human fossils from the Middle East that are 130,000 to 125,000, 100,000 years ago. Actually, Australia has changed. There are recently fossils of modern humans found in Australia. About 70,000 years ago. And then younger ages throughout Europe and Asia. And Eastern Europe, 40,000. And Western Europe, around 32,000. And then there's been some questionable fossils that seem intermediate between Neanderthal and anatomically modern humans, suggesting interbreeding. Okay, so this is what we look like. Neanderthals, we can look at, you can go online and take a look at what the skulls look like. But in terms of genetic similarity, it looks like obviously modern humans are more closely related to all the different modern humans compared to Neanderthals and Denisovans, and it looks like modern humans and Neanderthals and Denisovans all interbred to a limited extent. Only a limited. Okay. Now, let me go back. Okay. In terms of genetic diversity, all these different colored alleles or dots are different haplotypes or different alleles. So when we actually collect DNA from various populations all around the world, what we find is that Africa has the greatest allelic diversity, and then the further away you get from Africa, the more it becomes less and less diverse. Okay? So low diversity down here, lower diversity here. Oh, and in North America, very low diversity. Okay? Mainly because the oldest modern humans originated in Africa, and the genetic diversity, as you would predict, would be greatest there. Okay. Now, genetic diversity decreases with distance, as I mentioned. Haplotype diversity supports origin in Africa, but actually older now. And there's all these different alleles. And multi-regional predicts also that all these alleles should be found everywhere, all over the place. And we don't find that. So this we don't find at all. Now, Okay, so interbreeding, in other words, gene flow between anatomically modern humans like us, and today in Africa, Asia, Europe, all over the world. There are no other species of humans. It looks like Asians and Europeans share about 1 to 3% nuclear DNA. It looks like the earliest interbreeding with Neanderthals was in the Middle East. People from Oceania, Australia, share about 4 to 6 mitochondrial DNA or nuclear DNA with Denisovans following interbreeding in Asia. Okay, so there's interbreeding with Asia. Here's Australia and New Guinea, all of Melanesia, and that looks like there's interbreeding there. Okay, and whether the population, it was actually from a population from farther north in Africa that spread out, it's hard to know. There might have been a number of migrations out of Africa of modern, relatively modern human populations, but it looks like there's only one that really persisted. Okay. Okay, so this kind of shows interbreeding. Percentages of Neanderthals in the Altai Mountains. That's up in Siberia, Central Europe, Vindeja, and in this area in Spain as well. It shows there was some interbreeding between Neanderthals and Denisovans, and that there were Neanderthals that interbred with, or actually, here we go, a number of times. It looks like more than once, by the way. With Europeans and Asians, modern humans, rather. Okay? And then it also looks like Denisovans interbred with human populations, mainly in Oceania, but not entirely. Okay. Now, okay. So, here's some more stuff on interbreeding. So, Denisovans interbred, and it looks like they interbred with modern humans. Maybe a couple of times. Neanderthals interbred with modern humans a number of different times. And there's also some evidence that Homo erectus, an older modern human from Africa, might have had gene flow with all three of these groups before they split up. Okay? Okay. Okay, so mixing it up, these are all the various so Denisovans, modern humans, Neanderthals, modern humans, earlier and later, all sorts of stuff, the same thing here. So you can look at these. Now, of course, we're going from ancestral humans here, older, to younger. Here it's going the other way. I'm sorry about that. So this is older and younger. Okay. Okay. Now, I want to point something out else. Out. So, you would expecting, if there's interbreeding going on, what hypothesis does that suggest? That's the admixture or leakly replacement where there was inbreeding, but the main human population originated in Africa and then spread out and interbred with all these other archaic human beings. There's also evidence of modern humans in Africa having interbred with archaic populations in Africa. And there was another thing. Okay, I mentioned in terms of speciation, if you watch the lecture capture on speciation, that as species diverge and turn into new species or become new species differentiated, there's oftentimes there's a lack of gene flow, but mutations arise that you start getting hybrid male or rather inviability problems, whether the embryo doesn't develop properly, or males are sterile. It's usually males that are sterile. And if we look at the DNA in modern humans, on the X chromosome that deals with a lot of sexual function, there are large regions that are completely devoid of Neanderthal DNA or Denisovan DNA. In other words, what it shows like is a strong selection against that foreign DNA in that area on the X chromosome. That's the sex chromosomes. So males have an X and a Y. Females XX. If there's a problem on the X chromosome, males are going to show it first because they only have one X, and females have two, and sometimes you get what's called rescue. So we've actually seen, it looks like there was gene flow into modern humans, into modern human females for the most part, but that males were probably either had very low fitness because they didn't survive well, or they were sterile as well. Okay, so that kind of gives you an idea of what's actually going on. And we've discovered all this by looking at DNA. There was also integration, by the way, between modern humans and into Neanderthals, and modern humans and into Denisovans. In other words, there was interbreeding and there was gene flow both ways. Okay. So, here we are. oldest anatomically modern humans, they're not randomly distributed, but they're actually found in Africa. So it supports both of these hypotheses, right? Location of ancestral alleles, no consistent pattern, that's not true. The oldest alleles are always found in Africa. It looks like the divergence time, greater than actually about 300,000 years ago, not 1 million. Greatest genetic diversity in Africa, right? However, in terms of gene flow, yes, no. But since this pretty much gets rid of multi-regional, this gets rid of out of Africa. So the hypothesis with the most support in terms of predictions is this. I want you to remember, these are not experiments, this is just observation. So the inferences aren't necessarily quite as strong. If we could go back in time, we could better document it. One other thing. Another interesting thing is that Tibetans have a kind of hemoglobin that allows them to survive and reproduce more successfully at higher elevations than any other human populations. There's much less oxygen at, let's say, 15,000 feet. Now, there are people in the Andes or that are living in very high mountains too, but they don't have this mutation in the hemoglobins. And so what they do in the Andeans, what you find is there's a higher density of red blood cells carry more oxygen, but there's a cost to that. It makes the blood more viscous and more likely to cause clots and strokes and things like that. But the Tibetans don't have that. They have this different kind of hemoglobin where even with the same number of red blood cells, it carries oxygen much better. So the question is, where did they get this? It was thought that they slowly evolved after they split off. That population that lived in the Himalayas and stuff slowly developed these mutations. Okay, but when Denisovans were actually sequenced, Denisovan nuclear DNA, it was actually found that the DNA in the Tibetans matched the DNA from these earlier Denisovans in that one region. So it looked like that actual series of mutations that changed the hemoglobin and the oxygen carrying capacity of it actually might have entered the human population in terms of the Tibetans when their ancestors interbred with the Denisovans and had already been living perhaps in those higher elevations. And then that mutation persisted, or those mutations persisted, because it increased their fitness compared to having normal hemoglobin. Okay. Oh. Okay. These are some of the vocabularies I want you to know. Different allopatric speciation in different places. Behavioral isolation, so perhaps females of one bird species like males of their own species compared to the males of a slightly separate species. Biological species concepts, phenotypic species concepts, phylogenetic species concepts. Phenotypic is morphospecies. What's continental drift? Ecological isolation is like behavioral isolation. In this case, though, using interacting differently with the environment around them instead of interacting behaviorally with related species. Hybrid speciation, we didn't go into that. Hybrid zones, post-zygotic isolation, pre-zygotic isolation. Okay. So, biological species concepts again. Allopatric speciation. Polyploid speciation. We'll get into that today. Sympatric speciation. How do populations become isolated? Geographic isolation by vicariance or dispersal, or pre-zygotic isolation, post-zygotic isolation. And I think that's it.